very great here, but I want to welcome you to the third and final session in the last 24 hours in honor of Leonard Roberts and the storytellers of the Cumberland Mountains. And just to begin, I want to introduce again the people who came a very long way to share with us their memories, their knowledge, their wisdom, and their stories. And I'll begin on the left here with Bob Fugate, who flew in with Margaret Jane Muncy Fugate from Arizona to share their stories and their memories with us over the last two sessions. And then to Jane's left, our right, is Edith Roberts, who married Leonard Roberts 69 years ago. I keep saying that, and you keep looking at me like I shouldn't. And Lynn Roberts Denny is next to her. Margaret Roberts Biller is next to her. Larry Biller is next over. Rita Kelly, Roberts Kelly is there. Samuel Bear, I got it right this time. Samuel Bear, my great grandson.
Introduce my husband too. He missed out last night.
Okay, Bill Adkins is here. And Sue Roberts Adkins. And then the storyteller in the black hat, Emery Bear, and Joy Atkins Bear. And I want you all to join me again in thanking them for being here and everything that you've done to continue the traditions of Leonard Roberts, as was quite obvious last night when Emery told a story that no one else could remember. You're obviously moving along in the right direction. We're going to be speaking pretty informally as we go along, and we're going to welcome people to speak on these topics as we go forward. But before we do anything formal, Hugo Freund was here a minute ago. Has Hugo disappeared?
No, I'm still here.
Okay.
Yes, he's disappeared.
Okay. Hugo, I would like to introduce Hugo Freund of Barberville College, one of the places where Leonard taught. And he has a very special, Union College in Barberville, Kentucky, in Knox County. I do know, I'm very sorry about that. It's been a long 24 hours. But Hugo, could you join us right now with something that you have to say to the Roberts family?
Okay, well, I have a special presentation that actually is a secret except for a select few. But I thought it would be nice to recognize Leonard Roberts in another way. So that's what this easel is for. And from this box, thanks in part to the kindness of Union College, folklore.
It looks good that way.
Hugo, why don't you hold it up for a second? Upright.
Okay. This is a special certificate, and I'm going to read what it says in a moment. I have to thank Union College for agreeing to help me with this. And it is specifically to be presented to Edith Roberts, and also to recognize Leonard Roberts. And so this has a number of symbols in it, including the medallion for the college. At the back is a copy of the statement I'm going to read in a moment, as well as an explanation of the medallions themselves. And in this particular case, these medallions include, first of all, a representation of Union College, and the second one is actually for the love of learning. So with that said, and back to folklore here, let me read this. First of all, I want to thank, as Carl did, thank all of the Leonard Roberts clan, the Muncy, the Fugates, and others for coming. I'm just absolutely thrilled by it. I'll also mention my wife, Dr. Susan Isaacs,
On my knees before him.
who is serving as documentarian, but also shares an interest in folklore and folk life, teaches the same at Union, and we both regularly end up talking about Leonard Roberts, so I wanted to include her. In any case, let me read the statement. In Louisville, Kentucky, on this Saturday, October 25th, 2008, at the 120th annual meeting of the American Folklore Society, Union College of Barberville, Kentucky, formally recognizes the contributions of its own Leonard Ward Roberts, who lived 1912 to 1983. President Edward D. Rose and the college community celebrate and commemorate Roberts' many notable books and published articles, exceptional commitment to students, and path-breaking approaches in the disciplines of folklore and folk life. Born in Toller Creek in Floyd County, Dr. Roberts actively traveled the Cumberland Mountains of eastern Kentucky, visiting and interviewing Appalachians in their homes. Recognizing the vitality of their stories and tales, he included these storytellers in perceptive analyses of his own mountain culture. During his 4 years as professor of English at Union College from 1954 to 1958, Roberts served as chair of the Department of English and Division of Languages. In folklore courses, he turned to his local students for first-hand reports of their families' ballads and yarns. These Union College students responded enthusiastically. Their narratives are prominently featured in Roberts' 1969 book, Old Greasybeard, Tales from the Cumberland Gap. Union College also honors the central contributions of his wife, Edith Roberts, to her husband's endeavors. Her steadfast support and research assistance played an essential role in Leonard Roberts' success. In presenting this citation that I'm going to read in a moment to Edith Roberts, we recognize her as an expert in her own right. So that's the preamble to the certificate itself. Be it known that Leonard Ward Roberts, in recognition of his lifetime as distinguished interpreter of Eastern Kentucky culture, as author of many notable books and articles, as exceptionally committed teacher of Union College students, as path-breaking scholar in the disciplines of folklore and folk life, as perceptive analyst of Appalachian people's stories and tales, as intellectual enthusiast for his own mountain culture, and as a preserver of ballads and yarns. President Edward D. Rose and the Union College community present this special citation of achievement on this day, October 25th, 2008. And so it's my pleasure to present this now to Edith Roberts.
Thank you, Hugo.
My pleasure.
What we're going to do at this point is, I hope, just simply spend some time talking about the work of Leonard Roberts and the tales that he found. And I was thinking we might go in this direction of simply first talking about the storytelling and how it was experienced, and then talk about Leonard as a scholar, and then talk about Leonard as a man, if that's a direction that people feel comfortable in going in. And during that time, I'm going to ask just a few questions I don't want anybody who doesn't want to answer a question directed to them to feel impelled to do so. And I want people to know that the questions I have to ask are not necessarily at all the best. So I hope that whoever has anything to say about Leonard Roberts will be able to share it here and feel comfortable about doing that. I guess I would like to begin by talking a little bit about something that I've learned from Loyal Jones, and that is, as a teacher, Leonard Roberts was also a storyteller, very definitively a storyteller. And you have pointed out to me, Loyal, that in teaching, he was essentially a storyteller.
Yeah. I invited Leonard to class one time, well, several times, I guess, but anyhow, I happened to record this one session, and he was talking about the Appalachians and the people who came here and what they brought with them and everything. And he did it in his storytelling mode, you know, and it's so remarkable. I think it certainly keeps your interest. But he had all the inflections of a jacktail, you know, in that. And I would think it was a very effective teaching technique. Were you going to play a bit of that?
I can try to do that, but please keep talking as I try. It could take hours for me to get this right.
I think being a storyteller probably would help teachers. I mean, there's sort of a beginning and a middle or something and an end, you know. And I'm afraid as a teacher, I've sometimes wandered around all over the field, especially being an Appalachian, where you know, one thing reminds you of something else, and if you mention somebody's name, you're obligated to explain who that is, and by the time you finish, your students have no idea what the subject was. But Leonard certainly did that very well. Let me say this, as Hugo was presenting that beautiful plaque and everything, I thought, Union College has redeemed itself. I think Berea partly redeemed itself in honoring Leonard by archiving his vast collections of things. And thanks to Carl, there's been a summer conference of folklore graduate students and others looking into this collection, a lot of which has not been transcribed or published or anything. But I wrote when Leonard died, there was a special issue of Appalachian Heritage devoted to Leonard Roberts. That's published by Berea College. But I said he taught at all these colleges where maybe only a few recognized his true worth. He confided to me once that he went to President Hutchins of the famous educational family of Hutchinses and said that he would like to get a PhD. He was teaching in the Foundation High School of the college. He would like to get a PhD and come back and join the English department. Well, the English department was made up primarily of Berea being a missionary college from somewhere else, you know, and they had English teacher accents and so forth. While Leonard's grammar was impeccable, he never bothered to regularize. He was still from Floyd County, you know. And he said, President Hutchins looked at him and said, I don't believe there'd be a place for you here. And so I said that at all these colleges he taught, I felt he wasn't properly appreciated. As a matter of fact, Leonard went on and probably published more than any other Berea College graduate as a man of letters, you know, not only what he collected and did, he edited books, he published Twigs magazine, later the Cumberlands, published lots of young writers, he edited the works of poets and others in Eastern Kentucky and published them with the Pikeville Press there. And it's an enormous body of work. And so anyhow, I'm waiting to hear from Moorhead and Piedmont and West Virginia Wesleyan. I think they owe Leonard Roberts something here.
Well, Loyal, I would like to add in Berea's defense, although I agree completely with what happened earlier on, and would like to talk about that a little bit more later. that they did host that reception back in 2003 where I first met most of the family, and the people in special collections. Harry
yeah.
Rice, who made the CD for us when the technology wouldn't work, have been champions of Leonard Roberts' work. So if you can get to the basement of the Hutchins Library and forget the name of the library as you go through it, you'll run into some people who've done wonderful work.
Much appreciated there. And that's going to all be online, right? At least a lot of the stuff that can be.
We are desperately hoping that that will be the case.
Okay. Well, anyhow,
we're going
but
to
you're
do whatever we
welcome
can to make that happen.
to come to Berea and use the archives and Leonard Roberts' collection. Yeah.
I wonder if it might be possible that they can, it's about 80 pages, I think, to get that reprinted. It went out and we couldn't get more copies. And it has stories about, I found of interest of like how he met Edith and other stories that he told in there about the family and all, that if folk are interested in Leonard, they might like the stories about his life that were in that book. The Appalachian.
Yeah, point out which one you're talking about. And I'll
in
see
that
what I-
magazine that you
Yeah.
had, yes.
Okay, yeah.
It went out of, sold out, and they didn't have copies.
Oh, I see.
And it's because it has stories that other than the stories he has collected, it tells about his life. I think a lot of things that we don't have otherwise.
I want to mention too, thank you, let's talk about that later. Carl's book, hold it up, you don't have it. I want to make sure you know about that because this is a great honor to Leonard as well.
Well, I stole your
Yeah. Perspectives on the Jacktails and Other North American Marriages, okay?
Now, I do believe we've located the sound here, and I think
Okay,
we'll
let's
hear
hear a little bit.
what Loyal has to say about this.
Should I go on? The Appalachian people found the finest resources, don't you see, anywhere in the New World by getting into Appalachia. They were glad to be in the mountains. They were glad to see the fine spring water run down these creeks and these runs and streams and so forth. They were happy to see the fine fish and, of course, the fine wild game. They were happy to see all the varieties of trees because they were used to making their furniture and making their houses. And so they started building their houses, making their furniture, and established a fine life. Now, I haven't mentioned the mineral resources that they probably didn't quite know the value of. But after living here so long and establishing them a fine ranch or a fine estate, or say 500 to 1,000 acres, don't you know they were worth probably, potentially, had a base of $1 million right under their feet if they owned a 500 or 1,000 acre farm. Why? Well, what do you see what has come out now in the last, in this century? Has been oil and gas and great amounts of lumber have been marketed, you see, out of Appalachia everywhere. And we've simply kept up the rest of the country with natural resources. Trains began to go into the mountains. You see, they were always afraid of the mountains. So we beat the Indians, you see, and established fine homes and fine areas of life, and cities and villages and so forth. So then they began to come in. And then heard maybe the people talk about a burning spring somewhere. Now what was that? What was that? The people that were pretty well used to it, the people coming in thought it was a great natural thing or phenomenon of some kind. What was a burning spring? Did you ever hear of one?
I think you get a sense from that. Were you able to hear that all right? That's the best I seem to be able to do with the amplification here. But one thing that you were saying also, Loyal, about Leonard was that nobody enjoyed his stories more than he did.
I think so. I was listening in this same session. By the way, he finished this thing and talking about the burning spring, of course, was where natural gas was bubbling up and somebody set it on fire. So the spring, there's a place called Burning Springs in Kentucky. But anyhow, he was talking about if people had only known about all these riches, you know, and how much it was worth, we could have built castles all up and down the Big Sandy and lived like lairds, you know. He really just talk with that. Very interesting. But he was telling Jack in the Bullstrap, and for some reason he was even more animated, I think, in telling this story, and he stops all the way through it to chuckle and laugh, and he had the whole class laughing just over the story itself, you know, not anything particular humorous, but you could hear everybody chuckling and laughing and enjoying the story with Leonard. I think he always enjoyed the story more than anyone else. Well, not really, because he's a great storyteller and he had great effect, but he would stop to laugh a little bit in the middle of things, you know, and I always liked that very much. It sort of runs counter to what they say about the Appalachian storyteller, who always underplays it and is sort of passive and doesn't emote or anything. But he just enjoyed them so much it came out naturally, and everybody appreciated it and enjoyed the story more, I think, by hearing him laugh.
Well, that is the impression I got in a 1980 interview that he did, which I was able to hear at Berea, from which I quoted yesterday, where he said that, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, Loyal, wondering why he stopped making most of those recordings by 1959. That great collection really runs only up to that time. And for the 24 years after that period, he told millions of stories.
Yeah.
He had his students collect tons of stories, but it does seem that he was getting to this conviction that the real experience of the story comes from feeling the person who's telling the story feel the story. And Rita, actually, we were talking about that a little bit last night, a conversation that you had with your dad.
Yes.
Would you mind talking about that a little bit?
My skill, in the past anyway, was with singing, and I would find myself into the singing of it, sometimes to the point where I couldn't hide my feelings, just singing the words or the tune and so forth. And Dad and I had talked about this, and I don't remember exactly how it came up, but he was in the story. It wasn't just him repeating words he had heard, words he had collected. He was in that story, and he was able to understand that and to express himself, and that, I think, is what made him so good at telling the stories, because his emotions, his pronunciation of the words as the character would pronounce the words. He didn't say sword, he said sword. It was a sword that he took, and Jack took and chopped off the giant's head. And that was how the mountain people said the word, so that's how he said the word, even though he knew that the correct English pronunciation was not that, but it was because he was in that story.
And he would slap his leg.
Yeah. Well, I think that proves that these are stories to be told. I have the same feeling with Garrison Keillor, whom I appreciate very much as a storyteller, but when I bought his books and read the same thing, it just wasn't the same thing at all. You know, it's all right, but you know, you've lost the whole essence of his storytelling.
I wanted to ask about storytellers and teachers. This is an experience that I've had quite a few times. I find that the best storytellers and the best teachers are often the same people. That's something I think that you may have found, Royal. It's certainly something that came in Jane Muncy's family, where your grandmother, your great storytelling grandmother, was a great teacher. And I'm wondering, Jane, if you could tell us a little bit about what I've heard from you before about the fact that you had all those stories in your family, but you also had them at school. You had a situation where stories were told in both places.
Well, where I first met Leonard was at the Hayden School, the elementary school, and the reason he came there was a teacher whose name was Elijah Gay. Elijah was a twin, and I think his twin taught there at the school also. He was an unmarried man, and he pretty much devoted himself to his teaching, but he was not known in the community as a great teacher because there was not a lot of reading, writing, and arithmetic. There was, many days when he'd say to the class in the morning, "Did everybody bring their lunch?" And we'd all say yes, and he'd say, "Let's take off," and out of the classroom we'd go, and up the nearest mountain, which had a rock at the top, Devil's Track they called it. And we'd sit around up there, eat our lunch, tell stories, and come back down at the end of the day, and that would be it. Yeah, the kids in his class all loved him. They were coal mining kids, kids from the community right around the school. And he often had, I think maybe seems like 2 or 3 days a week when he would say, "Okay, today's going to be joke day, today's going to be story day," and we would go to the front of the class and tell a joke or a story. I have never had any trepidation about speaking in front of a group of any size. And I think it had its roots right there. It's just a thing you do. You talk to a few people or you talk to a lot of people, and it doesn't matter. But Lige Gay, I guess, I don't know whether he didn't like teaching or he loved teaching, but what he did, he taught public speaking, he taught being close with one another, sharing with one another. And so when I look back at it now, he was really a big influence in my being able to speak, to talk out loud to people about things that I knew. And he must have somehow got to know Leonard and invited him there, or Leonard heard about him and invited himself, I'm not sure, but he was just one of those people that came in that we did our normal thing with, got up in front of the class and spoke, told about what we were.
And your Aunt Nora was also a teacher. Do you know she shared her stories?
Aunt Nora had, she was a beautiful, large lady, as you could see by the picture yesterday, who loved to cook and loved to eat and have big dinners, but she also loved to tell stories. At the end of a day, when everybody was tired, there was no electricity in her house when I first knew them, and people would gather around the fireplace, which was bright and warm, and there were lots of rocking chairs sitting in a circle. Always makes me feel dear to my heart when I go to Cracker Barrel because I see all those rocking chairs. But around the fireplace were the rocking chairs, and people would come at night. The adults would sit. If there were small children, they could be held in the lap of an adult or on the floor beside the chair, and the stories would begin, and they were one after the other. I don't remember a break. Somebody would stop a story, and the other one would say, and it would be a whole page turning, and the story would begin again. It was our version of public television, I guess, without the commercials.
Henry, when you were collecting in North Carolina, wasn't Edgar Ashley a teacher as well?
He was, yeah, in Grassy Creek, Ashe County.
My understanding was from North Carolina, I haven't heard this documented so much in Kentucky, is that a lot of people had storytelling on Friday afternoons, that it was simply something you did. And and this I got mainly from around Madison County, and while you may know of instances of this as well, that this was the place outside of the house where the stories were most publicly shared. So that it was not unusual, for example, in his first tape, for Leonard to get recordings from people aged 11 to 18, but then get Lige Gay himself telling a story, because he was apparently quite a storyteller himself. And when you look at South from Helfersarden, you have a huge percentage of kids. 80% of the stories, I think, are told by people 18 or under. But you have a sizable percentage of those teachers as well. So it seems to me that it's natural that Leonard would have found these stories in a classroom in the Berea Foundation School and gotten excited about them that way and made them part of the teaching process as well. I'd like to ask, Henry, you had some things that you shared with me when I first saw you at the conference about your experience with Leonard Roberts in your sense of his contributions to what folklorists have learned in the last few decades.
Well, I like all the folklorists of my age, I of course knew Leonard Roberts, but I don't feel that what I have to say about him personally would be particularly interesting. But as a teacher of folklore, I'd like to make a much bigger statement about his. I'm so happy that he's getting the appreciation that I think he deserves. I'd like to put Leonard Roberts in a small group of people that I really believe are the most important people in the recent history of folklore. But I don't think the discipline has given them the appreciation, this group of people, the appreciation they deserve. Because unfortunately, it puzzles me, but this is true, that even though folklorists understand the world folkloristically, when they turn to history, they do history like everybody else. It's all great men and it's trickling down. And what I think really happens in folklore is that we go out into the world and we learn things directly from the people. And having learned those things, then we search around for some famous French person to whom we can attach those ideas. But the ideas didn't come from those people. It's just that later on we try to give them a kind of ennoble them by pretending that we learned everything from fancy philosophers and so on. But I think that what's been most important in folklore has been learned directly in the field encounter from the people themselves. And there's a little group of people in Leonard Roberts' day that I think laid the foundations for modern folklore. And he was definitely one through his work in Kentucky. And Vance Randolph in the Ozarks was another. And George Coursey, doing wonderful work with industrial people in Pennsylvania, and Gladys Reichert working among the Navajo. I think that little group of people prepared for modern folklore. Before that, everybody was doing a kind of philological work. They'd go out and they'd collect some stories and they'd put some numbers on them. I remember how mad that made Vance Randolph. He said, these are wonderful stories and I make these books full of stories, and then some guy called Herbert Halpert puts a bunch of damn numbers on those things. He said, really, the story's a good story. And so there was kind of a vision that the story wasn't good until it had a number on it. And that always made Vance really furious. He said the stories were better before they had numbers on them. But at any rate, the point is that there's a kind of an addition to the actual richness of folklore that's made, and very often there's a sort of a claim made for that. That's what's really important, this sort of extraneous knowledge. But I think there were a little group of people. Today we tend to think in folklore that the main way to think about folklore is performance theory. But in fact, that was learned before there was ever such a thing as performance theory by people that did a lot of very serious field work, just like Leonard Roberts. He went to the people, he learned directly from the people. And the book that I would like to end this rant with is to say that I think Up Cutchin and Down Greasy is really an amazing book. And if you read that book and read it carefully, you realize that inside that book is everything that folklore was going to develop in the next 30 years after that book was published. He understood that what was really important was the stories are very important, but it's really the people that tell the stories are the most important things. And that was a thing that he understood in Kentucky, as George Coursey understood it up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, as Vance Randolph understood it in the Ozarks, and Gladys Reichert understood it among the Navajo. And once we understood that what really mattered was the people and how they told the stories, the people and what they thought about the stories, then that became a whole new orientation in folklore. And while we say that we got that orientation from sociolinguists, in fact we got that orientation from the people. By going out to the people, by learning from the people, by learning their art, by learning what they thought about that art. And Leonard Roberts, it seems to me, was a great and tremendous pioneer in the development of modern folklore. So what I would say as a folklorist, as a professional folklorist, is that he was one of a small coterie of people that really developed the discipline as it's practiced today, but developed it empirically by going out into the field, by learning from the people directly, by honoring them and their contribution to folklore instead of spending all of our time talking about a few people far away. He talked about the people that were right nearby and talked about them very well. Now, I think Up Cutchin and Down Greasy is really one of the half dozen books that made modern folklore. Even though that may be the case that people haven't even read that book. The fact is, it's come through teachers like me, and that's I think that Leonard Roberts understood and really taught an entire field how to think about itself. Right on.
Off the cuff.
And in the midst of that, and all he had to teach, there was this strange relationship that people with these enormous talents and this enormous knowledge had with the educational system there. The great teachers, who were great teachers at home as well as in the classroom, were running up against some of these institutional barriers. As earlier you said, Loyal, Berea College was really in the middle of so much of this. That going back to the days, or just before 1900, when the president was Charles Goodell Frost, and he declared that the people of the Appalachians were so important because they are our contemporary ancestors. They are a cultural zoo. We can go there and watch them and see who we used to be. And he extolled these people at the same time that he was not putting them on the same level as himself. Yet, Jane, you actually had family members who went into his house. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because I'm wondering if, for example, wasn't it James Muncy, your great uncle, whose mother was actually taken into Charles Goodell Frost's house, and she was, I believe, a house cleaner. But she also, according to your great uncle, performed entertainment there as if she were the kind of living entertainment.
She had a varied career. She was half Cherokee, and she married my great-great-grandfather. She was a great, one of those greats. And she decided, she had two sons, James and William, and William was my grandfather, so it was great-grandfather. She decided that she wanted these boys to make something of themselves and get into a respectable career. One of them, she wanted to be a preacher, and one of them, she wanted to be a lawyer. And so she figured she would send them to Berea. And at first she sold moonshine, it's told, in order to get them there, which was one of the early things that some people did. And raised some money, got down to Berea, put her two boys in school, and I think worked in the house of the leader. She was an entertaining person. I think she played music. She was a very bright and industrious woman, apparently. Her boys turned out, one to be a preacher. He was a Pentecostal, James Muncy, who wrote a book called I Am James Muncy, or something very like that. Published it himself. He became Pentecostal preacher and a snake handler. And that was an interesting part of his life. He had 11 children, and I think 8 of them became something to do with the church, ministers and thereabouts. And my grandfather, Will, did not become a lawyer, but became a fiddle-playing teacher, and was a handsome rake who my grandmother saw him at Institute when they went to Berea, which was I guess where they went to get their modern-day continuing education, and set her cap for him, and that's how they got together. But both of these men were Berea graduates, and went through the school to do what they had to do later in life.
And didn't James actually walk to Berea from Leslie County?
Well, they did walk almost everywhere. They were, that was their way to get there. They had a mule, I think.
Rode a mule, probably.
I'd like to say that William Goodell Frost was interested in the local people. He would go out and preach in all the churches, and he knew enough to preach Calvinism to the Baptists, and Perfectionism, Wesleyism to the Methodists and Pentecostals and so forth. I mean, he really was interested in balance and encouraged Catherine Jackson French, who I hear was the first PhD woman woman who got a PhD in Kentucky, I believe it's Columbia, and her collection is in the Berea Library and is unpublished. Ross intended to publish it. There was some misunderstanding, and she took it back, and it's back there again. And yet, by the time I went to Berea and took a Survey of English course, I was an English major, we read the ballads out of the textbook, and nobody invited anybody to sing a ballad to us. You know, we'd lost that connection with the folk, I think, in those years. Although Richard Chase and a lot of other people would come to Berea, we had country dancing and everything, but the folk were somebody to be uplifted always. And I think trying to do folklore or Appalachian studies in a liberal arts college, especially with liberal arts fundamentalists, is one of my. And what I say is, the thing I have against them is they ain't liberal, you know, including the natural arts and whatnot of the people, was not something to be appreciated by the uplift mentality of particularly missionary liberal arts people.
Jane, do you know if your Aunt Nora went to Berea?
Aunt Nora was also a teacher, and I don't know for sure that she went to Berea. She may have gone there for the institutes. I don't know that for sure.
What strikes me as so strange is that she sent all her children to Berea. if
She
I'm
had
not
a
mistaken.
very, very close feeling about Berea. She wanted her children to go there for school. She thought it was a wonderful school.
So your grandfather, your grandmother, maybe not your aunt, but all of your cousins went there. So many people went there. Leonard Roberts, all of his stories are there. And now Berea does not have a course in folklore. What they have is this, again, this wonderful special collections. People like Harry Rice and Shannon Wilson who work down there and who have, you know, at their, have organized one of the great collections of this stuff that can be found anywhere. And it would take, I think, well, I've only spent a few weeks there myself, but I would guess, working systematically years and years to find out just exactly how much Leonard did leave there. Box after box after box, recording after recording after recording, brilliant stories and perceptions, page after page. And in most of the time that I've been there, I've been the only one down there looking at that. I know, Mary Ellen, you've been there. I don't imagine you had too much company when you were looking through the collections there as well.
That's great if you're there.
No, it works very quickly when you're there.
Lynn, why don't you tell how Rui said that Dad got to Berea to begin with?
We have one of my Dad's cousins, Rail, tells this story about how he and my father and 4 of his cousins ended up in Berea. And he says that Dad was very gung-ho education.
Very true.
His father had at one time had a fair amount of money and had moved them into town, and he had the opportunity to actually go to a regular school, go to the academy in Pikeville. And he got a little taste of that, and he wanted it. So when his parents split up and had moved back up to Toller Creek with his mother and the remaining children, he wanted desperately to go to school. So his Aunt Columbia, who told him the story, gave him a little job so that he'd have some money to work off buying a bicycle, and he was the lineman for her telephone company. And he would tell me stories about she'd come down to the junior high and tell him that she had a line down, and he'd jump on his bike and go and fix the telephone and lines and come back to school and finish up his classes. And so anyway, when he came back from being in Hawaii and he wanted to go back to school and everything and finish high school, where he and Mother met because Mother roomed with one of his sisters at one time. Real says that he had a catalog, like a Sears or something catalog, and in the back they used to have these little advertisements, and one of the advertisements in it was for Berea College. and it advertised that you could go to school free, go to college free. So he decided that that's the place for him. He wanted to go see what it was all about. So he hitchhiked down there and checked it all out and everything. He became so enthused and excited about the opportunity to go to college for free, basically, that he brought back several applications that he shared them with his cousins, and they all filled out the applications. He made them all go down there and put their applications in to go to college. Rel was the only one of the 5 that did not finish, that did not graduate from Berea. He became enamored with a woman and got married and went off to war, and so he never finished. But it always bothered him that the other cousins continued, even though they had to work hard to get through it. And I think that was part of Dad's thing, was that he wasn't afraid of work, so he felt like if he could work hard enough, you know, to pay his way through college, it was worth it to him. So Rel has, and you may be able to do something with this as far as anything. Rel started Roberts Endowment Fund at Berea, and our Roberts Reunion donates money to it regularly, and it's got a fairly decent amount, $30,000-$40,000 maybe by now, that we provide on the endowment fund. And he's always been encouraging of that because he feels like he didn't get an opportunity to finish his education. So it is specifically for students who come from Floyd County and the counties that surround it. So it is to help students that are from the area that Dad was born in and the cousins were all born in and raised in.
Have you written up this story?
No, I haven't.
Why don't you do that and send it for the archives to be there?
Okay.
Yeah.
I've tried to get Real to do it, and he keeps putting it to me, and
Yeah.
and I haven't dragged my feet on it.
And my comment will fit in right here. I'm the oldest of the 4 daughters. When it came time for me to choose a college, I applied to Berea.
Oh, yeah.
And guess what? My daddy made too much money.
Likewise. I wanted to go to Berea. I was born in Berea when Dad was a teacher there and Mom taught, and I couldn't go. I was real disappointed.
Berea's been prominent even in the New York Times because it charges no tuition and uses its considerable endowment to bring bright but sometimes poor people, and Congress used this to question people at Harvard, Princeton, otherwise about why they are not doing more with their much larger endowments to hold tuition down in this time when a lot of people can't afford to go to college anymore. So I'm glad Berea has hewn to this line, even though we miss some good students.
Dad always was very fond of Berea. I'm not that privy to all of the history that you brought up, but I do know that he always thought it was a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah.
For someone that really wanted to further their education that didn't have the funds, that was not an excuse.
Yeah.
And so that's why when he passed away, we really encouraged Mother to let us donate as much of his work as we could to Berea. We knew that they would archive it. We knew that they would give jobs to students to archive it and to transcribe it and to do everything else to it. And we knew it would be protected and preserved. It would be there for posterity. And I think that's what Dad wanted the most, was for people to understand and appreciate what they had and go from their heritage and not be ashamed of what raised you up, to build on that foundation and go forward from there. And just because you have an education doesn't mean you become a snob. It just means that you can then understand where you came from better and help to better the other people that want to better themselves from that area to rise above the poverty and the ignorance that they feel holds them down.
It's almost impossible to follow that, but I think in so many ways that's what happened with your dad going from school to school, that was the dream that he pursued, looking for his work at Berea, going to Union College, going to Moorhead, and wanting people, as we heard in that little bit of his classroom talk there, wanting people to just understand better where they came from and make that the basis of their education.
His emphasis upon education, not come from Indiana. My dad had a tradition of telling a lot of Kentucky jokes, and I will tell some still. And then afterwards, I like to say, my wife says she would not like that because she comes from Kentucky. But then I would end up saying, and I have said a lot of times afterwards, I say, now look, I told these jokes, but it's just in a good spirit. And I point out that Dr. Roberts had a PhD, his wife had an MA, and the 4 daughters had 5 MAs between them. And
Now she's got
and she has, what, something else?
No, let's don't go
5.
there.
Anyway, but anyway, that shows that there was a lot of education. They didn't have a lot of Edith and Leonard had others, 2 brothers and sisters and their children that got a lot of degrees. So it's education is they can talk about people sometimes and think back in the hills we're very ignorant. Well, it's obvious that that's not so.
Well, would you have anything to share about the way he administrated? Sorry, would you have anything to share about the way he administrated? If you'd like to talk about right now.
I don't know about that. I would like to follow up on the most of my work has been in having to do with Appalachia, and I think the stereotypes of Appalachia are everywhere, and they're easier to use and understand and deal with than a lot of scholarship might be. But there is generally Appalachia is thought of as poor and ignorant and uneducated and a lot of other stuff. There has always been a mountain middle class, I think. I did some work with Bascom Lamar Lunsford, a similar family, where he actually became a lawyer and taught, graduated from college. All of his siblings were educators or nurses or secretaries or something, And you don't, somebody made a film about Bascom and said, let's get one thing straight. He's not a mountain man or an Appalachian. He wears a suit and tie and this sort of thing, And there's a story about his brother digging a ditch, and he's down in the ditch barefoot with mud up to his knees, and but that when they went to eat, he came in and he kind of washed off his feet and put on his coat for the meal, even though he was still barefoot from his work out in the ditch. And my point here is that the mountain middle class has never been written about very much. The teachers and lawyers and preachers and all of these folks who certainly revered the idea of education and wanted to get an education like Leonard did. Most of the talk has been about poverty and about the curious ways, the strange and peculiar people of the Appalachians, maybe, rather than a great body of people who have a lot of the same aspirations and values of the rest of America. I think I'll not comment on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing, if you don't mind digressing a bit, when we're talking about Dad's interest in people rather than the intellectual context of the stories. I bet the other 2 sisters have stories to tell that are similar, but with different topics. And Rita was intimating that she and Dad had this little conversation. And Dad, a lot of times, if you're a parent, your kids are like, oh, Mom, oh, Dad. and they don't really know what you do, and they don't really care where you go. And well, we were those kind of kids too. There were a lot of times that we got drug into stuff, and I say that nicely because it was fun. He would always have us do the demonstrations on how to do the folk dances and stuff. But when it came to being adults, we weren't that familiar with what his work was. He went on and did his work regardless of whether we were standing there beside him or anything else. And if we happened to know it or take interest, then he would talk to us. But a lot of times he was so intellectual about things that if you asked him a question, you better be ready for the answer, because he might talk way up here and he might just get you right here. So you have to be paying attention, because he was trying to grab you, again, always trying to grab you into what was going on. He wanted to be your, what are you getting out of it? Very much the way that just impresses me with the way that Jane says that she talks about her therapy and stuff, and I think, that is part of Dad's thing. And so, to me, one time he sat me down, and most parents, especially fathers to daughters, would sit them down and say, here's how you deal with your finances. Dad sat me down and he said, be true to your art. That is the answer to the world. Whatever you do, whatever your art is, you must be true to your art. That things have gone on in history forever and a day. And when you look back at what follows forward, at what makes you immortal, it's not going to be your money. It's not going to be necessarily the words you say. It's going to be your art. And how you carry on is going to be what people remember your art to be, and how you instill that art in other people. And I thought that was a very valuable lesson to say, whatever it is, you don't have to be hugely successful monetarily. You don't have to go out and write a bunch of books. You don't have to go out and be a president of a company. You have to be true to what your heart tells you is your art, what skill you have to bring to this world. And again, that's another thing that impresses me, that you incorporate this in the path that you took. And I think that's wonderful.
Then I remember you telling me that you accompanied your dad to a National Folk Festival conference in Washington, D.C. And that was about the time that he was beginning to feel a little bit like a lot of the academics weren't doing what he was doing with the traditions that he loved so much. Do you recall what he had to say?
Well, I was pretty young, and again, it was kind of, I guess he was trying to talk to a teenager and express, that, again, you need to follow where your heart takes you. You need to do what you think is good and right about that. I cannot recall some of the specifics. I thought it was amazing that he would allow me, a teenager, to be loose in Washington, D.C. He was very emphatic that, at such an hour you will be here. But he was very trusting and believing that, what he had instilled in his children, that they would follow through with. So it was fun on that trip. I got to tell you guys a cute little story. He wanted to go on to the Blue Ridge Parkway, and being a teenager, I became bored rapidly with driving at 15 and 20 miles per hour. And so we decided that we were going to get back on the interstate, and at one little place we go over and we can see the interstate off over there. So we see. He was right. He would chuckle when you were talking about him laughing at himself. We were all talking about being his student and Mom's student at one time or other in our lives. And I said, we all agreed that what would bug us is that our fellow students would come up and say, what does he mean by this? Or what is he written right here? Oh, couldn't read his writing. None of us could read his writing.
He wrote in green ink. And so you could tell his papers with the returned students from anybody else's, but you couldn't read it. And we went to a Methodist college, and of course you got to take Bible when you go to a Methodist college. That's just the way it is. And because everybody has to take Bible, the instructor is going to sit you alphabetically. Of course, that meant that us people with poor eyes were going to be in the back of the room, and it didn't make any difference. We were all going to get C's anyway. That's what the professor said to be the very first syllabus of the class. You're all in here, you're all going to get C's, and then in the next class, and they're all going to get C's, and it didn't make any difference what sort of effort you may or may not make. You were all going to get C's. But they're in the same row that I was, and I'm sure it happened with Lynn and with Sue and with Margaret as well. There were students on either side, and they probably had Dad for some freshman English course, or you didn't have to be a freshman to take the course, but they would soon find out that your last name and his last name were the same, and were you kin, and oh yeah. And the next thing you know, isn't this right? You got a paper in front of you with green ink. You can't read it either. And I remember one time I was approached by this student, and he's written something on this paper, but I can't make out what it is. So I couldn't make it out either. But at supper, I mentioned it to the supper table. The so-and-so student says he can't read your writing and the comments on your paper. And he wanted to know whose student it was, and I told him. And for the very briefest period afterwards, the writing became slightly better. But I was telling somebody the other day about a postcard that I had gotten from Dad. The only legible part on it was my name and the address. On the back was a pretty picture of Toronto. On the front of it in the message part was something in green ink. And then my name and address. And I carried that around with me. I took it to Mom. Mom, what's She couldn't read it either. And I carried that around with me for a long, long time. I don't know where it is now, but you couldn't read his writing. I don't know how he managed to communicate with his students or otherwise, but as Lynn was pointing out, they would want us to intervene on their behalf for something or other from Dad, and none of us had any leg up.
Not only that, he didn't want to discuss. If you had classwork to discuss, make an appointment with him, come to his office. You're his daughter when you're at home eating supper and everything else, and when you're his student, you make an appointment and you come to his office just like everybody else. There's nothing special going on there. And so I had him for a class, and I was, at midterm, had a C. Well, I didn't like that, and I knew my parents wouldn't like that, so I thought, I'm going to make an appointment and see what's going on. So I go to his classroom, and I said, what do I need to do to raise this C? You know, I'm doing okay on the tests and stuff, I don't get it. He said, you need to open your mouth. You sit there and you stare at me all doe-eyed like everybody else does. You have to have something to say, something to contribute. How do I know if you're learning anything if you can't tell me in your own words what it is you think I'm trying to impart to you? After that, I was, I got something to say. So he always wanted you to interject, wanted his students to bring forth what they had out of themselves. He loved for two students to have a good argument in class, for them to have an opinion about something. He didn't care what the opinion was, just have an opinion about it. Go ahead and bring yourself into it. And I think that was one of the biggest themes that you've brought out that I don't think was quite as apparent to us until it was brought out. that was a huge thing, is to be yourself and bring yourself into it. You don't need to sit there and memorize something and spit it back out. You need to incorporate it into you, and that's how he told the stories. And what I was going to say a while ago is that a friend of mine had him for a class, and she said, your dad's going to have to quit laughing so much. I said, what? He had what I call this little hush puppy laughing. He'd think ahead of what he was going to say, and and he was telling them the story of Helen of Troy. And he was getting a little embarrassed, you know. The men have all been gone and they're coming back and they're wanting the women and the women are not letting them come in and everything. And he started, she said he never did finish the story. We have to read the book. So I think that was kind of one of his methods too in the storytellers. They bring you to the brink and he'd be laughing about it so hard that you'd be on the edge of your chair going, oh, what happened next? What happened next? And you read it. You know, you find out, you tell me in your words what happened next. So, but they would always come to us for interpretation. If you could interpret his writing though, you could get a little job. We had chores at home that we did. Everybody had to work, just like he had to earn his way. When you were at home, you had certain chores that you had to do. Just for living there, this is your job. You know, you wash the dishes, or you vacuum, or you this, that. But then they had some chores. We didn't get an allowance, but they had some chores that if you wanted to do something above and beyond your chores, then you could earn a little bit of spending money. And one of them was to, if you could read his writing, you could type for him. So I stole one of my sister's typing manuals. I was learning how to type, by golly. I didn't want to have to wash windows or cars. I was going to sit there and type both of them. But you had to learn how to read his writing. That was the hardest part.
He used the typewriter a lot.
He did himself.
For communication. And I was, being the oldest, would write back my nice lengthy letters not so frequently, and he would say, Sue, how about one page a little more often? And I had him in 7th grade for one semester, and I hurt my hand and apparently didn't do all of my math, so guess who got a C that time? And I said, Dad, how come I got a C? He said, well, you didn't do the work.
Their theory was C is average. If you, Mom and Dad both would say, if you do average work, you're an average person, C is average. Try really, really hard, put yourself into an Excel, and that's an A. But if you're C, and they would say, if you do your best, that's the best you can do. So did you do your best work? If you got this C, did you do your best work? Well, that's the best you can do. Maybe that's the best. You're average. Maybe that's it. Well, that makes me mad. No, we're not average. Always trying to excel. He had that little way, and Mom was right there with him, pushing us along.
And I had 3 jobs, 3 things. My church, my family, and my job. And I felt like I was divided. And it was a little harder for me to do good in all 3 of them.
Mother held down the fort a lot while Dad was off going to college. Up until I was born, Dad was pursuing his education a lot and going off to different colleges. So Mother was the one who was working full-time and taking care of the children full-time and sending him money to go to school on. He was working also to try to do it, but she was still, for many of those first years of their marriage, the major breadwinner, the constant breadwinner. And she would stay at her parents' house to raise the 2 oldest ones for quite some time. Although there's 2 little quick stories about that.
2 years.
One is that when Sue was a baby and Dad was in Iowa, he sent for Mother to come. And Mother's mother talked her into saying, you can't take that baby, that's a long trip, you don't know how long you're going to be there.
You can study with the child, you have to take care of it.
So Mother went up to Iowa without Sue. Well, Dad said, where's my baby? Mom said, well, I left her home with Mom. Dad got on the bus, went back and got his baby. And the other one I got to tell is really cute. When Dad died, we found this diary that he'd written, and he was off at school. Margaret was born just a few days before Christmas. And he was trying to finish up a semester, and he was away from home. And he was finishing up his finals and everything. And in his little diary, he has written, you know, that all these classes that he's taking, these things that he has to do, and very anxious to get home to his wife and his baby, and that she's pregnant. He hopes he can get home before the second one's born and all this. And he's talking about how much he really misses his family, and then down at the bottom there's this big teardrop. It was splashed and scattered the ink. It was so cute. But he walked in the snow to get home so that he could see his pregnant baby.
And she was born in the front bedroom.
Of grandma's.
At our grandma's.
Well, Mrs. Roberts, didn't you have at least a fourth job with your husband as singing for him?
Well, he was this end of teaching. I was way down here.
She taught elementary.
I taught the beginners, because the other way had good stuff. I enjoyed that. But you see, he was so busy on his job. Now he was busy on mine. We just had to do the best we could.
Well, it wasn't fair of him to make you do all this singing for him as well. I have a recording that he made of you about 60 years ago. Would you like to hear yourself singing Devilish Mary? I apologize for the level of the sound here. I can't make it any louder, but I think if we're quiet, we can hear Mrs. Roberts sing, and I think you'll hear somebody ask you for the song right at the beginning here.
The song is "The Devilish Mary," sung by Edith Roberts.
It's actually louder than I want it to be.
From her mother, Polly Justice Reynolds, who says she heard it about at least 50 years ago from Marion Lane, who lived on Johns Creek, Pike County, Kentucky. All right, Devilish Mary.
I thought I'd never marry. I fell in love with a pretty little girl, and sure enough we got married. Think to my dairy, prettiest girl I ever saw. Her name was Devilish Mary. We both were young and foolish, got in a powerful hurry. We both agreed upon one word, and the wedding day was Thursday. Think to my dairy, prettiest little girl I ever saw. Her name was Devilish Mary. She washed my clothes and old soap suds, the bag was full of stitches. She let me know right at the start that she's gonna wear the breeches. Think to my dairy, prettiest little girl I ever saw. Her name was Devilish Mary. We hadn't been married but about 2 weeks. She got as mean as the devil. Every time I looked cross-eyed, she knocked me in the head with a shovel. Think to my dairy, prettiest little girl I ever saw. Her name was Devilish Mary. We hadn't been married but about 3 weeks. She decided we will be parted. She up with her little lads and down the road she started. Think to my dairy, prettiest little girl I ever saw. Her name was Devilish Mary. If I marry the second time, won't be for the love nor riches. It'll be a little girl about 2 feet high, so she can't wear the breeches. Think to my dairy, prettiest little girl I ever saw. Her name was Devilish Mary.
I'd like to thank, does anyone have anything to add at this point? I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'd like to thank once more the Robbins family and the Muncy Fugate family for everything that they've done over the last day to reintroduce us to some of the great traditions of your family and of your I'm sorry, I'm obviously out of words. Thank you very much for coming.
I'd like to thank everyone for carrying on this wonderful tradition, whether it be oral, written, song, story, dance, But the folk traditions, I would like to thank everybody here and everyone in this field for continuing.
In that book that I mentioned, that magazine, they had a bunch of articles. One article I thought was really interesting, how much he loved this, the folk tales and all. And he had a friend that he went to school with give, it told how that the friend had met Jesse Stewart, and so then he went, he had an opportunity to go to Jesse Stewart's to visit the house. He'd just gotten married. It's, to me, it seems strange that you'd go, the man just got married and they're going to go visit his house. They went over to visit and they spent the night. And he was so taken, he just couldn't sleep. He was just, going over. He got to, because he looked up to Jesse Stewart. That was what he wanted to do, be a storyteller and all. And it just was, I'm joking just now about it, but it just was touching to me how that he got to be there, and he how could he sleep? He was in the house of Jesse Stewart, But he appreciated and wanted that education. He wanted the storytelling tradition and all.